Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of. As many of you know, I am a huge mood reader, and for that reason, when I created my extensive TBR last year, I tried to include a variety of books that would take care of me throughout the four seasons. So when last November came around, I decided it was finally time to read Stephen King's supernatural classic, The Shining, which this kick-ass book was recommended to me by the very awesome Zachary Bynum, who I would like to thank for his recommendation because I thoroughly enjoyed this work from cover to cover. Now, before I get started, I would just like to note that while I've seen the movie adaptation and the miniseries of The Shining probably about a million times, this was actually the first time I ever read the book. And upon finishing my read, I totally understand why King hated the Kubrick adaptation, as Kubrick totally cut the heart out of King's work. And while the miniseries is much closer to the source material, there are still differences between the two. However, I'm completely cool with the miniseries as King wrote that adaptation and it stayed true to his vision. Aside from that, I would like to take this opportunity to reminisce a little bit because even though this was the first time I read The Shining, I do have some really fond memories of this book as it was one of the many books in my Aunt Carrie's library that always fascinated me. But even though I wanted to read this at a very inappropriate age, she said it would be better if I held off and read it at an age where I could comprehend it better. Which I remember thinking to myself, how could a book about a haunted hotel be that complicated to understand? However, I'm glad I took her advice because had I read this at an earlier age, I don't think it would have hit the same as it did now. And speaking of which, since I inherited some of my aunt's library upon her passing, I would just like to show off the original cover for The Shining. And I know it's a little haggard and everything, but that's still so badass and it means a lot to me. Like, check it out. Love it. And granted, this is a book club edition, but that is the original cover, I do believe. And yeah, she was a heavy smoker, you can tell. So there are definitely coffee stains and cigarette burns throughout this book, but I absolutely adore it, and it's probably worth nothing to nobody except me, so I'm very grateful for this. With bragging rights aside, I would like to add that I buddy read this book with a fairly large group of friends. And among them, I would like to give a shout out to my good friends Aaron, Ducky, and Tammy, as well as my good online friends John, Blake, and Hanny. Which, as always, I'm happy I was able to experience this book with everyone, as I had a great time discussing themes and characters. Also, as a side note, for those who have never read The Shining before, this novel does have multiple scenes that regard domestic violence. So, for that reason, if child or spousal abuse is your limit, then this probably will not be the book for you. As a matter of fact, the domestic abuse was so intense that one of our readers was unable to finish their read. But anywho, before I take up any more of your time, I would just like to thank everyone who buddy read this with me. And of course, I would like to thank Zachary Bynum for recommending it. And if any of you are watching, I hope you enjoy this review. So, with that said, let's go spend the winter at the infamous Overlook Hotel and see how this inhuman place makes human monsters. The Shining by Stephen King focuses on the Torrance family, where it introduces a down on his luck recovering alcoholic named Jack, which early on it's revealed that he lost his teaching position due to a physical altercation that he had with one of his students. Following that incident, he and his family were forced to downsize their life, which caused them to move into an apartment because of their dwindling finances. However, even though Jack has had a hard time finding a promising occupation, things are looking up because an old friend that he used to be colleagues with has just helped him land a job as the caretaker for the historic Overlook Hotel. But the only catch is he and his family have to reside in this isolated landmark during its wintry off season. Meanwhile, although Jack and his wife Wendy are hopeful for this opportunity, their young psychic son Danny has received gruesome visions from an internalized source named Tony, where Tony has been trying to warn him about the Overlook. Also, even though Danny's parents are aware of Tony's existence, they dismiss him as being nothing more than an imaginary friend. Nonetheless, Tony continues trying to warn Danny, despite the fact that Danny doesn't quite understand all of the visions that he receives. Shortly thereafter, the Torrance family is left alone at the Overlook from October to April, and at first, Jack and Wendy feel like this will truly be a step in the right direction. Yet, as the season stretches on and the Torrance family becomes snowbound, not only does Danny have more gruesome visions of yesteryear, when the Overlook was young and full of hedonistic guests, but he also receives disturbing blood soaked visions of the immediate future. Then, as the spirits of the Overlook grow stronger and Jack slowly unravels under their influence, Wendy and Danny must do the inevitable to survive as the hotel wants new blood to join its party. The Shining by Stephen King was published in 1977, and once it roughly sold 50,000 copies, it became King's first hardback bestseller, where it reached number 8 on the New York Times bestseller list. In 1980, The Shining was adapted into the Kubrick classic. Then, in 1997, The Shining came to the small screen as a made for TV miniseries, which was written by Stephen King. In 2013, King released the sequel to The Shining called Doctor Sleep, where Danny returns 36 years after the events that occurred at the Overlook. In 2021, J.J. Abrams pitched a spin off concept to HBO Max for a 10-episode series called Overlook, which was to chronicle the sordid history of the hotel. After HBO declined the show, Netflix picked it up, where it currently remains in limbo. Throughout the years, The Shining has influenced many forms of art, such as in 1982, it inspired the musical artist Kate Bush to create the song Get Out of My House, which appeared on her album The Dreaming. And in an interview, Bush stated, "The Shining is the only book I've read that has frightened me." In horror, 100 Best Books, edited by Stephen Jones and Kim Newman, Peter Straub praised The Shining, where he called it a masterwork, a bold product of an original vision, a novel of astonishing passion, urgency, tenderness, understanding, and invention. Prior to The Shining coming to be, the Stephen King Illustrated Companion states that on a whim in 1974, Stephen King left his home state of Maine and he moved to Boulder, Colorado after he randomly pointed the city out on a map. One weekend while residing in Boulder, King and his wife Tabitha decided to leave the kids with a sitter so they could enjoy a brief getaway at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. Upon their arrival, since the hotel was in the process of closing for winter, they were its only guest. While visiting, King wandered about and became influenced by multiple subjects, which included the architecture, room 217 where he and Tabitha stayed, the hotel's bartender who he met by the name of Grady, and a nightmare of his son being chased by a fire hose. Prior to his stay, King had considered writing a story about a boy who could make dreams become a reality, and he elaborated that this was inspired by The Nursery and Ray Bradbury's short story called The Veldt, which was about a telepathically controlled virtual reality where two children had their parents eaten by lions. King liked the idea of a child's mind acting as a psychic receptor, and he stated to attendees at a talk in Pasadena, California, "I wanted to take a little kid with his family and put them someplace cut off, where spooky things would happen." And the original idea for this, which he called Darkshine, was to be set in an amusement park. However, this proved to not work, as King explained to the audience, "The thing is, you can't really cut a family off in an amusement park. They'll go next door and say, 'We've got some problems here.'" Salvaging the best parts of Darkshine, King had began to write The Shine, which was deliberately constructed to be a five-act play with the idea of it being a modern-day Shakespearean tragedy. In this regards, it started with a lengthy prologue called Before the Play, which was cut from the novel due to length considerations. Nonetheless, it eventually saw print in a special Stephen King issue of the magazine called Whispers. Then it was reprinted in TV Guide with illustrations commissioned by horror artist Bernie Wrightson. The original epilogue was also reworked and incorporated into the last chapter. During the time in which King wrote The Shining, he struggled with supporting his family, and he was coping with the loss of his mother. In interviews, King confessed to feeling rage over his family, then guilt for having felt that anger. Even still, he didn't find a connection between himself and his character of Jack Torrance until he became sober. In August 1982, the fifth volume of Whispers magazine provided insight into The Shining, where King stated, "The story unspooled itself without a hitch or a snag. I never had a depressing feeling that I lost my way. For the 3 to 4 months that I wrote The Shining, I seemed to be back in that trailer in Herman, Maine, with no company but the buzzing sounds of snowmobiles and my own fears. Fears that my chance to become a writer had come and gone. Fears that I had gotten into a teaching job that was completely wrong for me. Fears, most of all, that my marriage was edging onto marshy ground and there might be quicksand any place ahead." He noted that by making Jack Torrance a drinker, he was able to look around a dark corner and see himself as the person that he could have been, under the right set of circumstances. Yet it wouldn't be until over a decade later, when he counted the beer cans in his wastebasket, that he realized he was an alcoholic, and when he wrote The Shining, he had been subconsciously writing about himself. In a Playboy interview by Eric Norden, featured in the issue for June of 1983, King explained, "With my rigorous Methodist upbringing, I began to wonder if the haunted house could not be turned into a kind of symbol of unexplained sin, and that Jack himself is a haunted house as he is haunted by the past of his father." In an essay on The Shining, King wrote, "I saw a face that hypnotized me because it was, to a large extent, my own. The book became a ritual burning of hate and pain, and in the actual writing, done in a quiet, rented room overlooking the Flatiron Mountains, I found myself mesmerized by the story." Aside from these inspirations, King also mentioned he was inspired by The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, The Fall of the House of Usher, and The Mask of Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. Also, he noted Dick Halloran as a reference to Halloran House in Shirley Jackson's classic The Sundial. Fun facts! Here's a few things you might not know about Stephen King and the Stanley Hotel. In the past, King has been vocal regarding his dislike for Kubrick's take on The Shining, and he said what's lost in translation is the heart of the film. The love Jack Torrance has for his family, which becomes imperiled when the insidious effects of the Overlook Hotel's haunted history takes a cumulative psychic toll on Jack. He finally snaps and loses his tenuous grasp on reality. At a press conference to promote the 1997 miniseries, King explained, "In order to get this project off the ground, a deal was made between me, Warner Brothers, and Stanley Kubrick. One of Kubrick's stipulations was that I would not be able to talk about his version of the film. So I don't, because I can't. If you ask me to talk about it, I'll say no comment." From the 1997 TV guide that promoted King's miniseries, King explained, "Doing The Shining was like a dream to me. To be able to do it, to have it put together, to have ABC be as welcoming and supportive of the project as they were, and to get a chance to work with Mick Garris again after working with him on The Stand, and having that turn out the way it did. To get a chance to work with the cast that I did. Filming at the Stanley proved to be a challenge. Shooting on location always presents its own host of problems, but who would have ever thought the cast and crew would have to endure ghostly sightings?" Mick Garris, who directed the 1997 miniseries, explained that while at the Stanley Hotel, there were the real ghosts, where cast members would see doorknobs turn on their own accord, and they would collectively hear a mysterious thumping which disrupted shooting. Garris elaborated further by saying, "One of our costume people went to bed one night, and 5 minutes after he hit the sack, something sat down on the bed next to him." Actor Steven Weber, who played Jack, shared that he had also heard ghost stories, where he explained, "When you have big, beefy men come down to breakfast and say, 'Man, something walked through me last night,' you know they are not kidding." Yet, that is but a small fraction of the paranormal activity at the Stanley Hotel. In 2014, Lindsay Galloway of BBC Travel pointed out in a story online, long before King's stay, room 217 already had an infamous history. In 1917, Elizabeth Wilson, who served as chief housekeeper, had been lighting the hotel's lanterns to prepare for a possible power outage due to a storm. When she went to 217 to light its gas lantern, little did she know there was a gas leak, which resulted in an explosion. In turn, this blasted out the floor beneath her feet, which resulted in her falling down to the story below. Although she survived and was in a short coma, she suffered two broken ankles. Nonetheless, those who stay in 217 claim that Elizabeth's spirit occasionally stops by to tidy things up. Due to its history in King's novel, room 217 is usually booked months in advance. One couple who stayed in room 217 reported they woke up with their bed made around them while they were still inside, whereas unmarried couples have reported a chilly presence settling into bed with them while they were sleeping. The website Uncover Colorado details that before the Stanley was a hotel and the town of Estes Park was established, the area was home to the Ute and Arapaho tribes. While variations of how the Stanley came to be slightly differ, the origin takes place when an inventor named Freeland Oscar Stanley had visited the location after becoming diagnosed with tuberculosis. And after having stayed there for just one summer, his health became restored, which he believed was due to the fresh air and abundant sunshine. From here, he and his wife Flora made plans to build the Stanley, which, such as King's Overlook Hotel, was built in 1909 with modern conveniences. Although Stanley died at the age of 91 in 1940, like the ghost of Elizabeth Wilson, many have encountered his spirit at the bar and in the billiards room. The ghost of his wife Flora has also been reported multiple times tinkering around on the hotel's piano. Aside from that, there is the haunted fourth floor, where guests have heard a child's laughter when no child is present, and a tour supervisor claimed that this floor one time made her mysteriously ill. Also, room 401 is rumored to be haunted by a malevolent male spirit, and it is supposedly the creepiest room in the hotel. Multiple accounts have been reported from women who claim that this spirit touched them inappropriately. Further down the hall, multiple guests have reported being tucked in their bed in room 407, as well as having a ghostly figure sit at the foot of their bed. It is also rumored that room 428 is haunted by a cowboy that stands over guests while they sleep. Another haunting regards the ghost of a golden retriever named Cassie that was laid to rest in the property's pet cemetery. Story goes that its spirit still delivers newspapers, and it scratches at the doors to be let in from outside. Also, there is a network of caves under the Stanley where workers would go to and from, and tale has it that the ghost of a pastry chef is said to haunt the caves with aromas of baked goods. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoilers segment, which, if you haven't read this book before, I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So, if you would like to click away, all you have to do is scroll down to the comments and click on the timestamp that's provided in the pinned comment at the top. Once you do that, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this. So, ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about a few of my favorite moments. First up is the infamous scene when Jack investigates room 217. Now, leading up to this, Danny had entered room 217, where he was attacked by a woman named Miss Massey, which prior to their encounter, it had been established that she had committed suicide in the tub years ago. Meanwhile, Jack unintentionally destroyed their CB radio due to him sleepwalking as he experienced a horrible nightmare about his abusive father. Shortly thereafter, Wendy and Jack found Danny in a comatose state with bruises, which this caused Wendy to assume that Jack hurt Danny again. Then, eventually, after everything calmed down, Danny revealed to his parents that he was hurt by a woman in room 217. Which, upon them learning this, Jack goes to investigate. Once there, he sees that, except for a bath mat being out of place, everything else appears to be normal. Yet, as soon as he lets his guard down, he smells soap. And although at first he shrugs this off as being his imagination, after he approaches the door that leads to the hallway, he hears the shower curtain close by itself when he had left it open. In response, Jack turns around to see the silhouette of a human figure behind the shower curtain, which this is finally enough to make him run from the room. And as soon as he shuts the door, he hears this wet thumping sound come from inside room 217 as the thing steps out of the tub and crosses the floor. From here, Jack locks the door, closes his eyes, and he tries to rationalize that this is nothing more than his imagination. However, when Miss Massey jiggles the doorknob, Jack has the urge to look, but he feels if he does, he will lose his mind if he sees the doorknob turn. Nonetheless, he still can't help but wonder what he would see if he looked through the peephole. Y'all, this scene scared the ever-loving living hell out of me, because not only did King gradually pace the suspense until it exploded into this nightmarish climax, but his brief description of Miss Massey was just enough for my imagination to concoct the worst possible scenario when Jack encountered her. For example, when Danny sees Miss Massey, the stage is already set for a good, solid scare, as she's described as having this gas-bloated belly, a purple face, and marble eyes. So, in this regards, the creep factor and gross out has already been established, and due to how King wrapped up the altercation between Miss Massey and Danny, it filled me with a level of dread that I just could not shake. Nonetheless, while I thought Danny's experience was intense, that was nothing compared to what came later when Jack stood outside of room 217 as Miss Massey walked towards the hallway door, which I think the main reason why this made my blood run cold was because I still felt complete dread due to what happened to Danny. And Jack's experience added on to that dread, which was pretty damn frightening because I had no idea what in the hell would come next. Also, even though I had a pretty good idea of what Miss Massey looked like due to her previous description, I began to imagine the parts of her that King didn't describe, which this made the whole boogeyman aspect seem that much worse. Then, when I didn't think King could take it a step further, he made Jack have the urge to look through the peephole. And y'all, as soon as this thought entered Jack's head, I was ready to pull my damn hair out and scream, because had he looked, I feel like no matter what he saw on the other side of that door, even if it was nothing, I don't think I could have handled it since my adrenaline was already through the roof. My second favorite moment was the tunnel scene with Danny, which, before this happened, Jack had gaslit Wendy and Danny by acting like room 217 was empty, and the attack that Danny suffered was nothing more than his imagination. After that, Thanksgiving came and went, and everything seemed to somewhat mellow out for a little bit. Then, one day, Danny goes outside to play, and such as how Dick had warned him not to go into 217, Dick had also told him to stay away from the topiary. But regardless of Dick's warnings, Danny dismisses the snow-covered hedge animals and he goes on about his day. Well, at first, everything seems like it's fine and there's nothing to worry about. But as Danny continues to play about, he notices a cement tunnel that looks like an igloo due to how the snow formed around its ring opening. And since he's really not considering how dangerous this could be, he digs some of the snow away from the entrance, slips inside the tunnel, and sees that the other end is completely compacted with snow. Which it isn't until he's deep within the tunnel that he suddenly feels too confined and he realizes there's a chance that snow could collapse at the open end and trap him inside. So before anything bad can happen, he begins to crawl back out of the tunnel. And as soon as he reaches the exit, a small portion of snow collapses just as he feared it would. However, before he can dig himself free, he hears something stirring around in the darkness behind him. And as it crawls forward, he can hear the sound of crackling leaves as it progresses. But right before the thing can grab him and pull him back to the rear of the tunnel, Danny digs his way out and crawls over to the jungle gym to catch his breath. Yet, once he's over there, he becomes distracted from snow falling off of one of the hedge animals. Then, upon him turning back to face the cement ring, he sees the hand of a dead child waving at him from the darkness, and he believes it's calling for him to become its playmate forever and forever. Y'all, even though the book didn't give us a set of mutilated twins who tried to entice Danny to come play with them forever and ever and ever, this moment was frightening because King never really described the appearance of Danny's attacker. And to be honest, he really didn't need to, because just the idea of Danny being in a cramped, dark space with something unnatural was scary enough. Then, when King had the dead kid's hand stick out of the tunnel and wave at Danny, I just about lost my damn mind because I had no clue what was going to happen next. Which, to be perfectly honest, I think this scene scared the hell out of me because I simply didn't see it coming to start with. Like, when Danny crawled down into the tunnel, I was too focused on the hedge animals trapping him inside to consider anything else. Then, when Danny started to crawl out and he heard the rustling leaves from the darkness behind him, it returned me to my childhood fears of being alone in the dark. My final favorite moment was when Jack lost all traces of himself and confronted Danny. So, leading up to this, Danny had telepathically reached out to Dick for help. Jack became seduced by the hotel, and Grady's ghost revealed to Jack that they wanted Danny because his powers can enrich the Overlook. Also, following Jack's attack on Wendy, she and Danny were able to overpower him, knock him out, and lock him in the pantry. However, later that night, Grady set Jack free, where Jack then used the rope mallet to attack Wendy. Shortly thereafter, Dick made it inside the Overlook, but unfortunately, before he could do anything, Jack had knocked him unconscious. Meanwhile, Tony warned Danny that it is coming, where not long after having this revelation, he is confronted by the thing that's now living inside of Jack. From here, Danny sees Jack's face has been shredded and his rolling eyes have a lunatic cunning in them. Yet, even though this thing within Jack has turned him into an absolute nightmare, Danny stands firm and states that if there were anything left of his father within the thing, then his father would not let this happen. Which this is just enough for Jack to shine through so he can tell Danny that he loves him and to run. And while Danny stands over Jack, telling the thing to get out, the thing begins beating itself in the face with the mallet, where it destroys the last of Jack's image. After that, Danny sees what remains of Jack's face has become this strange shifting composite where many faces have become mixed imperfectly into one. Even though everything leading up to this confrontation was intense, let's get real. I knew Danny was going to live because he's a star player of Dr. Sleep. However, it was a jolt to see Jack go from being recognized as a human being to becoming something so horrific that he was described as an it. Also, the imagery King gave when Jack rounded the corner with the mallet was every bit as intimidating as I hoped it would be, as I already began to perceive him as this unhinged, seething madman. Then, when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the description that King provided when the thing inside of Jack began to beat himself in the face with the mallet was just the level of scare I needed before the boiler exploded. I would like to take this opportunity to bitch. And guess what? It ain't gonna be about Wendy and Jack because God bless them, they were trying their damnedest to get their shit together. However, Jack's father and Wendy's mother were two worthless bags of pus that I would have loved to have slam dunked into a festering dumpster that was rotting under the Mississippi sun on a summer day. Because had these two jackasses been better parents, then perhaps Jack and Wendy would have had some good examples to lead by. But no, they were stuck with parents who were nothing but absolute hemorrhoids. Now, for starters, I would like to rip Jack's parents a new asshole, because yeah, I get it, his dad was an alcoholic, but that did not give him the right to literally beat his wife's teeth out of her friggin' head. Then, when she was hospitalized for her injuries, she corroborated everything her disgusting chode of a husband said because she was Catholic and didn't believe in divorce. Which, in turn, this led to one of their children joining the military just to get the hell away from them because the abuse sure as hell didn't end there. Aside from him, we have Wendy Scab of a mother. And even though she didn't put Wendy through the bullshit that Jack's father had put him through, this flapping asshole was so relentless with her nagging towards Wendy in regards to her own failed marriage. All I wanted to do was just sit her bony little ass down and say, "Lady, go get some strange and chill the hell out." And since she was a domineering puke bucket of a human who believed it was her way or the highway, Wendy chose to stay with Jack versus returning home to a mother who could make Satan weep. The Shining by Stephen King is a gothic classic that has stood the test of time. And I'm convinced that because of it being the psychological nightmare that it is, it will continue to frighten future generations. But aside from this work scaring the ever loving living hell out of me, I feel like not only did it provide me with iconic lifelike characters, but it provided me with characters who I truly cared about, and I wanted them to live happily ever after. Also, other than great character development, I feel like this novel provided quite a bit of symbolism, as well as quite a few themes, some of which include addiction, the family unit, and how people react under stressful circumstances. Character wise, the Torrance family is more complex than just being black and white. And with that in mind, although each of them make good choices, they also make poor choices. First off, Danny is a prime example of an innocent child who, although might be naive on some subjects, he comprehends way more than what everyone gives him credit. Even still, this doesn't stop him from being a typical kid where he places himself in dangerous circumstances even though he knows better. Then we have Wendy and Jack, who are both a reminder of how loving parents simply do what they think is best. Yet, despite their best efforts, no one has all of the answers, and there will always be conflicts that arise. Which, because of that, Wendy and Jack aren't always a success when it comes down to parenting or even marriage. Even still, that doesn't change their love for Danny. On that note, personally, I feel like one of the main reasons why this book is so effective is because although Jack is a recovering alcoholic who is still coping with anger issues, at the end of the day, he did love his family, especially Danny. And because of that, it made his downward spiral even more devastating as he eventually hit rock bottom, where he became the Overlook's right hand man. But in contrast to Jack progressively becoming worse, I do feel like Wendy did the opposite, where she grew stronger rather than weaker. For example, at the beginning of the novel, Wendy may not have had the nerve to leave Jack after he broke Danny's arm. However, before the book concludes, I felt like while she did maintain concern for her husband, her will to live and protect Danny was greater. Not to mention, when push came to shove, she could really kick ass. Also, there's Danny, who I simply just wanted to coddle because ever since he stepped onto page, I knew he was going to endure some physical and mental trauma that he would likely never be able to recover from. And even though Dick tried to mentor him, Danny did what almost all children do, which was to put himself in dangerous situations. But what impressed me so greatly about Danny was the fact that he was so very brave, not only when he saved himself, but when he also saved his mother. And with that in mind, I do feel like Danny had a lot of growth throughout as well. For example, when we first meet Danny, we know Jack broke his arm. Then, as the story advances, he's attacked by hornets and Miss Massey in room 217. But by the time he's attacked on the playground, his senses of fight or flight finally kick in. Then, by the time we get to the grand finale, he's literally staring evil dead in the face and telling it to get out. So, with all that said and done, I feel like Danny became a very well empowered character. With the Torrances aside, Dick Halloran was a lovable grandfatherly character. And to be honest, after having grown up with the movie, I couldn't unsee him as Scatman Crothers. But other than how lovable Dick was, I feel like his character was important to the plot in many ways. Like, had it not been for him, this book could have had a completely different outcome, which I wish I could elaborate on, but that would reveal some spoilers. Also, while he was on his way to help the Torrances, Dick was met with obstacle after obstacle. Like, nothing about his journey was easy. Nonetheless, he stayed determined, and despite his struggles along the way, he continued to bump into people with the shine who were kind to him, which this was really cool to see how their simple gestures empowered him when he needed it the most. And after I read that segment, I felt like nothing about these encounters were coincidental, and it made me consider how fate can make the right people step into your life at just the right time. And before I move on, I have to note that the Overlook felt like a living, breathing character, which, because of its vibe, it feels like it's this extremely intimidating allegorical figure that brings into perspective how enablers and addiction works. Also, it seems like Overlook is a very suitable name for this hotel, because while the name could be taken literal where the establishment overlooks breathtaking property, let's not forget that the hotel has seen its fair share of debauchery and bloodshed. However, not too many people think of these horrors because they were swept under the rug or they were overlooked, so to speak. Symbolically, one of the first things that Hanny and me noticed were the topiary animals, because primarily they felt like the Overlook's equivalency of guard dogs. And as I browsed around online, it appears that the topiary animals are symbolic of the hotel's distortion and corruption, as well as a reflection of the wealth and power belonging to the hotel's management and clientele. For example, as far as corruption and distortion is concerned, the topiaries are intended to provide guests with an appearance that's to be cute and whimsical. However, due to what they're capable of, they are threatening and dangerous. Then, from the perspective of wealth and power, they serve no practical purpose, as they are simply a way for the hotel to flaunt its ability to hire someone to give them the constant maintenance and care that they need. Then there's the wasp nest that seemed like it played an important factor, especially since the third part of this book is called The Wasp Nest, which overall I felt like this was foreshadowing of the danger to come. But aside from that, I felt like it represented a great deal more. For example, in chapter 14, there's the statement of, now looking down into the nest, it seemed to him that it could serve as both a workable symbol for what he had been through and what he had dragged his hostages to fortune through, and an omen for a better future. Then, when the wasp attacked Danny, I felt like King used this as an opportunity to show how Wendy and Danny can no longer fully trust Jack's actions. Also, there's a couple of scenes where Jack's father and Dick have stories about how fire can kill wasp, which, due to what eventually happens, could this possibly be King suggesting that the Overlook is similar to a huge wasp nest? Another symbol that stood out was the clock in the Colorado room. And although stating the obvious that time is relevant within the Overlook, there's a scene where the clock shows Danny pornographic images. And due to it attempting to corrupt him with these images, could this possibly be a suggestion that time corrupts everyone as we age? Although I'm sure I'm missing a lot of symbolism, before I move on, I would like to applaud King's literary references in regards to the Overlook's existence. Which, among these references, he mentions the fairy tale of Bluebeard, Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, Edgar Allan Poe's The Mask of Red Death, and Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. Which, among these, it's not hard to see how King drew inspirations for his classic. But personally, more than anything, I was really pleased to see his Alice in Wonderland reference because, similar to Wonderland, the Overlook operates without logic. Theme wise, the primary focus of this work is the family unit, which this subject leads to a lot of different discussions in general. But the primary one that comes to mind is the subject of domestic abuse. And even though Jack's abuse is primarily seen when he's drunk, we also see that he has unresolved anger issues, which, because of this, his rage can reach levels where he blacks out, and when he comes to, he doesn't recall his actions. And while for the most part Jack does try to do what's right for his family, he doesn't stop drinking because of them. Instead, it takes a drunk driving incident to make him go cold turkey. Nonetheless, unfortunately, the damage he did to his family is already done, and it causes Wendy to question if she and Danny are safe or if they should leave him. Also, since Wendy can't fully trust Jack again, he feels like his past mistakes will always be held over him, which of course this increases the tension among them. And no matter how hard they try to move on, some issues, such as abuse, just can't easily be forgotten. Before I move away from Jack and Wendy, I would like to add that while they felt like they had Danny's best interest at heart, to me, that wasn't necessarily the case. Like, for starters, at the end of the day, Jack didn't stop drinking for Danny's sake. Also, while I'm not a parent, I'm pretty sure I would have left Jack after he hurt Danny. Yet, under the circumstance of this book, Wendy stayed with him because she didn't want to return home to her mentally abusive mother. So, yeah, she was stuck between a rock and a hard place. However, I think I could have sucked it up for Danny's sake. On top of that, as we discuss this book as a group, we collectively felt like both parents made a poor choice when they decided to isolate themselves with a young child. Because not only did they shut Danny off from medical attention, but Wendy secluded him and herself with a person who has a history of violence. Aside from them, domestic abuse is seen again with Jack's father and Wendy's mother. And even though we aren't given a detailed backstory on Wendy's upbringing, we know that she came from a broken home with a mother who blamed her for her own divorce, which, due to her bitterness, Wendy's mother mentally abused her to the point that she didn't feel like she had a safe haven for refuge. Then we have Jack's situation, where he grew up with a father who was an abusive alcoholic. And under this circumstance, although Jack's mother had the opportunity to get help, she corroborated her husband's lies because, due to religious purposes, she didn't believe in divorce. Which, similar to Jack's mother, we see where the toxic cycle remains unbroken when Wendy corroborates Jack's lie after he injured Danny. Granted, Wendy and Jack do try to provide a better home life for Danny compared to the home life they suffered, which obviously you should want to provide your child with a good upbringing and break the chain of generational trauma rather than having your child relive the same nightmare that you survived. With that said, I would like to add that King does a great job of providing us with three different examples of domestic abuse, which hopefully these subplots will provide red flags for people who are unaware of how abuse can vary. Also, at the end of the day, I believe The Shining suggests that when you become a parent, your child comes first, even if it means sacrificing your marriage or a job opportunity. Next up are the subjects of addiction and enabling, and in this case, Jack's poison of choice is alcohol. Now, primarily, this book shows how addiction can destroy a family and how alcoholism and abuse can go hand in hand. Which not only is this seen by Jack's father being an abusive alcoholic, but it's also seen by how Jack has the potential to go further down the same path that his father was on. Also, as I previously mentioned, although Jack vowed to never drink again after he broke Danny's arm, he still continued to drink, and it wasn't until a drunk driving incident that he gave up the bottle. However, I personally feel like Jack would have continued to drink had his friend Al Shockley decided not to quit. Which that assumption made me consider the possibility that at this stage in life, Jack was a follower and not a leader. Adding on to that, I would like to address how Jack went cold turkey, which not only can going cold turkey be dangerous, but there's no one to guide him when mentorship is needed. Which, if you are addicted to anything, there will be times that you will either fall off of the wagon or come close to falling off of the wagon. And when that happens, it is purely human to need a helping hand from someone who's been there before. But with that in mind, there's always an enabler, which in The Shining, it's the Overlook Hotel. And while the motives of the enabler are vast and there isn't just one particular reason why enabling exists, in this book, the enabler uses Jack's weakness and addiction to break him down, which upon Jack hitting rock bottom, it gains complete control over him. So let this be a lesson. If you have an enabler in your life, you might want to ask yourself what that enabler has to gain and look deeper into your relationship, because there might be a hidden agenda. Or on the flip side, if you feel like you are an enabler and you have an addict in your life, perhaps you need to evaluate yourself on why you're enabling. Another focus of this book is how people react under stress. And what better way to present this topic than having the characters snowbound in the middle of nowhere? Which, in just a small amount of time, King does a superb job by showing how each character reacts differently under tension and influence, and just how quickly things can go south when surrounded by hostility. And in this page time, it was really interesting to see how Danny and Wendy became stronger with every obstacle they overcame. Whereas once Jack gave in to the Overlook, he spiraled out until there was honestly nothing more left of him. Also, because of the Torrances being snowbound together, we see how they were forced to analyze themselves and confront personal demons. Which this concept branched off into quite a few different directions, where the Torrances explored feelings of guilt, resentment, and trust issues. And throughout their struggles, we see that not every family can make it through the hard times together. Well, I could go on and on and on about this book, but if I did, this video would probably be well over an hour long, if it isn't over an hour long already. But it's simply best to say that while this book did provide a couple of gross out scenes, its creep factor was high, and it did scare the ever loving living hell out of me. The Shining by Stephen King is a psychological gothic classic that is still relevant today. And while this is now among one of my favorite ghost stories, just know that although it begins with a slow burn, there are Easter eggs scattered throughout the first half that all come into play as the plot unfolds. Also, I tend to think had King not paced everything out the way he did, with his character development and description, I don't think this book would have been half as effective, as it does deliver a great deal of heart, which in turn makes everything even more devastating. So, if you were like me and you had never read The Shining because you had seen its adaptations a million times, and you can tolerate graphic domestic abuse, then go on and add this bad boy to your TBR for next November because I do highly recommend. Well, now that we're at the end of this video, I would like to take this opportunity to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account, I have a link available in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. And if there is a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll do that. Also, I do have a $10 tier available where for $10 a month, I'll still give you the shout out as you see here, but I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month, I send out one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off and do whatever you like with it. So if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can continue to have a good time together. Also, if you would like to hit me up on social media, links to my Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Threads are all available in the description section of this video. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell, as I do have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week and sweet nightmares.